Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a deeply sobering reality within our legal framework. We're going to look at cases where the perpetrators of absolutely unthinkable, violent crimes aren't hardened adults, they're children and teenagers. When the young person commits a severe crime, the justice system faces an incredibly heavy burden. Basically, they have to weigh the chronological age of the offender against the absolute finality of their actions. Now, the facts we're about to go through are definitely jarring, but understanding how the courts navigate these tragic waters is absolutely essential if you're studying law, society, or the juvenile justice system as a whole.
So it really begs the question, how exactly does the legal system respond when a teenager commits the ultimate crime? To figure that out, we're going to break down 4 very distinct, highly severe murder cases committed by juveniles. We're going to look at the digital evidence they left behind, how they behaved during the investigations, and most importantly, the final judgments handed down by the courts. Because honestly, the details of these cases reveal exactly where the justice system draws the line. Let's get right into it.
Case number 1, the lethal car crash. This is the Mackenzie Shirilla case.
Okay, so just outside of Cleveland, a 17-year-old named Mackenzie Shirilla crashed her car into a commercial building. Now, on the surface, it looked like a tragic accident that killed her boyfriend Dominic Russo and his friend Davon Flanagan. But the data told a completely different story. She was going 100 miles per hour. Prosecutors made it explicitly clear to the court this was not reckless driving, it was intentional murder. Video evidence presented in court actually showed her driving calmly, making a right turn, and then all evidence indicates she just immediately put the pedal to the metal. She allegedly drove that exact same route a few days prior just to plot the crime. Her intent was to kill her boyfriend, and his friend was viewed merely as collateral damage in what prosecutors described as an extremely toxic relationship.
During her sentencing, Shirilla stood there in tears, claiming she wished she could remember what happened that day. But the judge wasn't having it. Pointing to the total lack of mechanical failure with the car or any medical emergencies that could have caused the crash, the judge was absolutely resolute and delivered a really stern reality check, stating, "A failed suicide attempt is not a defense to murder."
And here is the final, very real consequence of those actions. The judge found Mackenzie Shirilla guilty of murder for the deaths of Dominic Russo and Davon Flanagan. She was placed in handcuffs right there and sentenced to 15 years to life in prison on 2 separate counts, which she'll serve concurrently. So a momentary calculated decision behind the wheel resulted in 2 lives lost and literally decades behind bars for a 17-year-old.
Moving on to case number 2, the ruthless classmate. The Aiden Fucci case. Shifting from a vehicle used as a weapon to a horrific close-quarters attack, this case takes us down to St. Johns County, Florida. 14-year-old Aiden Fucci was captured on video running from the woods where his 13-year-old classmate's body was eventually recovered. And the sheer scale of the violence here was staggering. To put this into perspective, the victim suffered a total of 114 stab wounds. That included 49 defensive wounds, which indicates a desperate struggle for her life, and 35 wounds specifically to the head and neck. It was a reality of extreme brutality that the court just had to confront head-on.
But you know what's particularly chilling about this case? It's Fucci's demeanor right after the crime. Get this. After he was arrested, he was actually taking Snapchats in the back of the cop car, captioning them about having fun. Contrast that digital footprint with the incredibly heavy scene that went down in the interrogation room. A video captured Fucci's parents speaking to him, reprimanding him for the Snapchats, and delivering this just devastating realization. They had to explain to their 14-year-old son that this wasn't a joke. It was the end of his life as he knew it, and theirs.
Ultimately, Aiden Fucci pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. When the judge handed down the sentence, he noted the absolute severity of the crime and sentenced the teenager to life in prison. However, because of Fucci's age at the time of the crime, the law mandates that he's eligible for a review of his sentence in 25 years. And following the sentencing, Fucci just stood there completely still, showing very little movement as his lifelong fate was sealed.
All right, case number 3, murder over a bad grade. This is the Miller and Goodale case.
So moving from solitary perpetrators to co-defendants, this case out of southeastern Iowa presents just a terrifying sequence of events. 16-year-old Willard Miller received a bad grade from his high school Spanish teacher, Noema Graber, and his response? It was shockingly calculated. This was not a sudden crime of passion, guys. It was methodical premeditation. Miller and his friend Jeremy Goodale literally stalked her daily walk at a local park. They stood as lookouts, executed a military-style ambush from behind, beat her to death with a baseball bat, and then dragged her into the woods. They arrogantly assumed no one would ever find her.
But we all know that in the modern era, criminals frequently leave a digital trail that totally dismantles their defense. A witness actually went to law enforcement with Goodale's Snapchat messages, which directly implicated both teens. Goodale posted a point-of-view message mocking the last thing their Spanish teacher saw, explicitly saying it was time to hide a body. It's hard to believe, right? This electronic arrogance was paramount in securing their arrests shortly after the crime.
Now, this case starkly illustrates how the court weighs cooperation and demeanor. Both boys were 16, but their outcomes were very different. Jeremy Goodale pleaded guilty and actually testified against his best friend, Miller. In court, Goodale expressed deep remorse, saying he wished he could go back and stop himself. He received life with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Willard Miller, on the other hand, apologized for the distress but primarily focused on asking the judge not to be institutionalized for too long. He appeared completely unfazed as the judge handed down a harsher sentence, life with the possibility of parole after 35 years.
And that brings us to our final case. Case number 4. Betrayed by best friends. The Schaaf and Eddy case.
Continuing with the theme of co-defendant, we travel to West Virginia for this one. 16-year-old girls Rachel Schaaf and Sheila Eddy plotted to murder their friend Skylar Neese. And the motive? They reportedly decided they simply, quote, didn't like Skylar anymore. The stark contrast between this incredibly trivial teenage grievance and their calculated scheme is just alarming. They didn't just act out in a fight, you know. They carried out a premeditated joint plan. They hid knives on their bodies, waited for a specific agreed-upon moment to attack, and ultimately killed Skylar.
The whole case actually broke open because of Rachel Schaaf's confession, which led to the arrest of both teens. Schaaf agreed to plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for her cooperation with investigators. In court, she delivered a tearful apology, stating she had shamed her family and hurt the Neese family, expressing that there really weren't proper words to describe the daily guilt and remorse she felt. Because of her confession and that plea deal, the judge handed down different sentences for the two girls. Rachel Schaaf was sentenced to 30 years in the West Virginia State Penitentiary, with the possibility of parole in 10 years. Sheila Eddy, however, was sentenced to prison for the rest of her natural life. But because her sentence was categorized as with mercy, she will be eligible for parole only after she has served 15 years.
All right, Section 5, the final judgments. Let's pull all of this together. These 4 cases highlight a really harsh and unyielding reality. The legal system does not ignore the brutality of a crime simply because the perpetrator is young. Whether it's a calculated car crash at 100 miles per hour, an ambush over a bad grade, a 114 stab wound attack on a classmate, or a plotted betrayal between best friends, digital footprints like Snapchats and video footage almost always bring the truth to light. The collision of reckless youth and permanent digital evidence really defines modern juvenile justice. And as we've seen, a momentary, brutal decision in one's youth consistently results in a lifetime behind bars.
I want to leave you with a final thought to chew on. We've seen how the courts apply the law, right? Weighing the horrific nature of these crimes against the youth of the offenders, often ensuring they are locked away for decades, if not forever. But as we continue to study the intersection of youth development, digital evidence, and the law, you have to ask, when a child commits an irreversible crime, does a lifelong sentence truly deliver justice? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I highly encourage you to keep exploring how our society balances accountability and age. It's a complex puzzle for sure.